Welcome to another episode of Audio for Film and Video. In this case, we're going to talk a little bit more about sweetening your sound by using EQ. Now, in our particular case, we're going to use dialogue for our example, and we're aiming for sort of a natural sound, nothing too stylized. So you might want your sound that sounds like this. All right, this is a quick dialogue test to illustrate the benefits of using equalization on an audio signal of dialogue for your film or video. To sound a little bit more something like this. All right, this is a quick dialogue test to illustrate the benefits of using equalization on an audio signal of dialogue for your film or video. Now, one of the first things to consider is your frequency range, and your lows will typically be in the 0 to 300. The mids will be maybe 300 to 6,000, and then your highs will be 6,000 up to 20,000. Now, the first thing you need to know about using equalization to sweeten your sound is typically for dialogue where you want a natural sound, often you want to reduce certain frequencies. Now, that might come as counterintuitive. Say, for example, you want something that has a little bit more low end to it because it feels a little bit thin and maybe a little too hyped in the higher frequencies. Well, typically what you want to do is find the frequency that is causing the problem and pull that down by a few decibels. And that can range from, maybe just 1 or 2 decibels, maybe down even in the extremes down to minus 10 or 12. So that's the first principle. It's typically going to sound better if you subtract than if you try to add something to a frequency. So for example, again, if you're looking for that sort of richer low end, it usually works better to cut a frequency up higher than it does to add a frequency down lower. And let me show you how you do that. My first recommendation is that you actually use a parametric equalizer. Most digital audio workstation programs will have a parametric equalizer. And let me just describe quickly how most of them work and how this particular one works. Again, not important which digital audio station you're working with. The same principles apply to all of them. Typically, there'll be 3 controls, at least 2 controls. The first control is frequency, and that just specifies which frequency you're going to affect and modify, and we'll just take that one to about 1,000 there. The second is your gain, and this is where you can cut or boost. And again, we're going to cut, but we'll come back to that. All parametric equalizers will have at least those 2, frequency and gain. Most of them will also have a bandwidth, and let me show you what that does. So if I do a cut here of about 10 decibels, the bandwidth affects the width of that cut. So for example, if I decrease the bandwidth, you can see it's cutting a narrower notch, or if I increase it, it goes much, much wider. So that just sort of gives you a little bit of fine-tuning ability. All right, so these are the things you want to remember about how to use this parametric equalizer to fix the sound that you're working on. Now, in our example, you'll notice the one that was untreated that didn't have the equalization, that the audio sounded a little thin, was kind of lacking in the bass range, seemed kind of harsh in the mid to highs, actually mainly the mids. So what we want to do is, first of all, decrease your gain to a pretty extreme amount. So we want to drop ours here, for example, about 10 decibels. That's quite a bit. And I'll just leave the bandwidth where it is. You want to leave it relatively wide because you're going to come back and fine-tune that later. And then what you do, while you're playing your audio and listening to your dialogue, you'll want to sweep the frequency until it starts to sound better. And you kind of you just go back and forth until you find a sound that's working pretty well for you. And I find oftentimes with a lot of microphones and with dialogue, for male voices at least, a lot of time you're going to want to cut in the about 1K to 1.5K range. Just a kind of a rule of thumb, but again, sweep to find what works best in your particular case while you're playing your audio. Once you find that spot, you can come back in and kind of fine tune it. You may want to back off the gain. So, for example, you may want to be somewhere between 10 and 3. Don't go too extreme. If you start going more than 10, things start sounding really funny under most circumstances. So, again, kind of fine-tune that. And you can also fine-tune the bandwidth. If you really only need to cut a pretty narrow notch, you can back that off some, or you can even widen it if you really need to. So that's really all there is to it. Again, you want to drop your gain about minus 10, then you want to sweep until you find the sweet spot, and you come back, fine-tune your gain, and fine-tune your bandwidth. And that's really all there is to it. Thanks for checking out the show. Hope you found this helpful. Make sure you subscribe up top so you can get future videos where we talk more about sound for film and video.